is that in the communities that received treatment here, we had a very drastic drop, about a 50% drop after one round of treatment. But then over subsequent treatments, it really didn't go that much lower. So one of the messages is, well, MDA can certainly have a big impact, but it can't get you all the way to elimination. You're going to have to do something beyond just providing MDA in order to get communities free from schistosomiasis. Then when we compared with the 2 rounds of treatment followed by 2 holiday years or alternating, at the end of the 5 years, certainly in all 3 arms, there was a significant decrease in infection, both in terms of the prevalence as well as the intensity. But between the arms, there really wasn't that much difference. So in fact, it sort of looks like treating every other year is almost as good as treating every year. Now there's certainly logistic complications and arguments for treating every year versus every other year, but it did suggest that if you were only able to treat every other year, at least in the low prevalence communities, you could still have an important impact on schistosomiasis infection levels. The SM2 study was, as I mentioned, in the higher prevalence areas, and again, we use school-based treatment in the same sort of schematic as were in the SM1 studies, but we also had 3 other arms, and again, there's 25 villages per arm, where we did community-wide treatment every year, community-wide treatment for 2 years, followed by 2 years of school-based treatment, or community-wide treatment for 2 years, followed by 2 drug holiday years, and again, a final evaluation at year 5. Here are the villages that were involved in the SM2 study. So there are 150 villages, 25 per arm, and again, they're all nicely mixed in and randomized around the lake. And here's what we saw. So the graphs on the top are those communities that received community-wide treatment, so either community-wide treatment every year, community-wide treatment followed by school-based treatment, community-wide treatment by drug holiday, or school-based treatment every year, 2 years, 2 drug holiday years, and then every other year. And again, what you can see is that, of course, the prevalence, the starting prevalence is much, much higher than in the SM1 studies, but even after 5 years, what we're able to do is cut it in half. Now, of course, we didn't have quite the plateau, arguing that as you continue, maybe these bars would continue to go down if we had been able to extend the study for more years. But again, there was within each arm, there was a significant reduction and really quite a drop in high intensity infections. But when you compare between arms and either school-based treatment or school-based treatment or community-wide treatment, really there's no great benefit of community-wide treatment over school-based treatment, at least in school-age kids, because all these measures are being, again, made in the 9 to 12-year-olds. However, as I mentioned, we also looked at year 1 and year 5 for both the first-year students and the adults. So here are the data from the first-year students. The prevalence is on the top, intensity on the bottom. And you can see that arms 1 through 3 are the community-wide treatment, so you're not very surprised that you see a big drop in prevalence and intensity in arm 1. But what was intriguing to us was that even in the schools that only ever received school-based treatment, there was again this drop from year 1 to year 5. Now the caveat, of course, is that none of these differences are significant because there was quite a bit of variation, except in arm 3 for prevalence. But it was interesting that these very young children that had never received treatment, once they entered school, they already had some benefit of their community, of their school children in that community having been treated. And the same thing was true for adults, which was actually even more surprising. And in this case, they were all significant differences. So, not terribly surprising that villages that had received community-wide treatment would have a change from baseline to 5 years, but very surprising that adults in communities that had only ever received school-based treatment would also have an impact on the adult level of infection. So this again argues that perhaps school-based treatment is going to be sufficient to have the same benefits as community-wide treatment, and of course is less expensive. Now, we also looked at a comparison of communities that had received 4 rounds of treatment versus 2, and even though the individual arms were not significantly different between each other, those villages that had received 4 rounds of treatment did have lower prevalence and intensity of infection than those villages that had only received 2 rounds of treatment when you look at them on aggregate. But the other thing that we noticed was that this distribution of the prevalence levels was not bell-shaped. In fact, you had 2 humps. So you had a group down here and a group up here, a group down here, a group up here. And this was fairly true across all the arms. And so what we did was we went and we mapped where were these communities that had this high level of prevalence. And when we looked at it, we saw that they were all sort of geographically clustered in one area. And this is what's known as a hotspot. And so what we saw is that all of these communities around the lake, no matter what arm they were in, responded fairly well to the treatment program. But these communities that were in this section of the lake, and so again, this is within the Gulf and this is out on the open lake, so certainly there could be some differences in snails or other environmental factors. But we were able to detect that these communities were less responsive to MDA than the communities the rest of the way on the lake. So if we removed the communities that were less responsive, those in that ellipse, the hotspot area, and then looked at the data again, we saw that really we're able to get infection levels down, in many cases, to almost 10%, which is really quite dramatic when they start out at over 50%. And so that was, certainly we need to know more about how to treat those communities in the hotspot areas, but in the communities in non-hotspot areas, the impact of treatment was really impressive. And then the last thing that we have done on this so far, we've got ongoing studies, and I think maybe Rosemary will present some of that over the next 3 days. I don't see where she's sitting, so I don't know if she's nodding or not. But we want to know, well, how quickly during a treatment program can you detect this, whether a community is a hotspot? And what we saw was that even after 2 years, after the second year, you could already see which communities were not decreasing as quickly as the other communities. And the current WHO guidelines suggest that you should only be checking this, check the progress about once every 5 years. And these data, plus some data that have been generated now by SCI, actually suggests that really looking as quickly as 2 years after you start your program might be very useful. And so this is, again, part of that operational research that helps you to say, well, okay, how should we change programs? How should we make programs better so that we can deliver protheclonal better and have a better public health impact? These are, the Mass Drug Administration had fairly similar impact in each of the study arms. We did a costing analysis that I won't go into. But really one of the most important things, at least to me, was that treating the school-age kids had a beneficial impact even for people that were not getting treated, even for the adults, even for the very young children. So just treating the school-age kids, reducing that force of transmission, really had a benefit for the whole community. So that was what I found interesting. Last thing I want to talk about is a study that we're just about to start in Western Kenya. And again, we're really interested, well, what are the public health impacts? How can we improve the distribution of protheclonal? How long do you need to give protheclonal? How low